Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please look us up on your favorite podcast app, subscribe, like, and share so that you never miss an episode. If you'd like to further support us, visit patreon.com/speakingout and check out the different rewards. You'll find exclusive rewards if you sign up as a patron of the podcast. Thank you for your support, and let's get into the show. How do you talk to your kids about having an abuser in the family? When you have an abuser in the family, do you tell them? When do you tell them? How do you tell them? That is the topic of this episode today. First of all, we want to give a warm thank you to our patrons. We really genuinely, I mean this from the bottom of my heart, we do not deserve the kindness that we get from our patrons. You guys are absolutely incredible. You're faithful. You support the podcast. You give us feedback. You talk to us outside of Patreon.
Right.
You're involved in our lives, and
Right.
we genuinely don't deserve it.
We thank you so much, sincerely. This is a God mission for us. You are part of that God mission, and we thank you so much for partnering with us.
Yes.
Without you, we couldn't reach out as we do.
Yes.
So sincerely, thank you again.
And of course, the invitation is always open for new patrons. We have a restructuring that's coming here pretty soon with different rewards. We've been doing Patreon for over 2 years now, and we're just going to offer different things and get some feedback from our current patrons. So we're really excited about that too. It's just a cool way to support the podcast. And
we just want to connect closer with everyone.
Yeah.
Truly.
For sure.
Yeah. Right.
So this came up because I wrote a blog post. I'm going to link to it in the description. I wrote a blog post a few days ago called "It's Been 10 Years Since Reporting My Dad, and the Reality of Losing So Much is Hitting Hard." Again, this is something that you don't just get over. It's not like, you move on and,
Right. No.
Life goes on back to normal. There is no such thing as normal after such a heavy discovery.
It's not a one-time loss. It's
Right,
layers
yeah.
and layers of losses that continue going on
Yeah.
and will forevermore, really.
Yeah.
When you have something like this in a family unit, and especially that we were a tight, close family unit, and now experience brokenness on a level that we certainly never expected to. It raises all kinds of questions within the younger kids growing up now, and it poses a problem of sorts for parents if we're left wondering, what do we do? How do we handle this situation? And I know there's not a lot of information out available. In fact, I've read none on this particular
Yeah, there is very
topic.
little.
No,
You're right. And we were just talking before this podcast started. We were just talking about specific family members that are just, going through such a hard
Struggling
time.
bad,
And,
right.
It's those never-ending ripple effects. And each one of us, each one of my siblings and I, even Mom, like we're our own family unit within the bigger
Right.
family,
Right.
So each of us has our own individual problems, our own individual families, our own individual homes, jobs, et cetera, and that just we all handle it very differently.
Right.
And it's so challenging, and there are just so many ripple effects that never stop. I mean, for all of us, there's not a single day that goes by. I can't think of one day where this hasn't
No,
been
the impact is there.
in the
and
forefront of my mind.
Yeah. Oh, yes, definitely. I know you wrote on your children in the blog post and the questions that they have for you. The grandchildren, your children included, when they visit, have often asked me, why do you live alone? Where is your husband? what happened? Are you sad that you're alone? Are you afraid that you're living, and many times when it's been time for them to leave, they'll say, I'm so sorry that you have to be alone. And it's hard to answer a lot of those questions for me because I'm not sure how each individual family, each of you kids, has handled this topic with your
Well, and that's it.
children.
I mean, they're not your kids, and it's
No,
not really your place
it is not. And
to
right.
talk openly about the kids. So it's that there's no manual for this.
No.
And in fact, I did some researching before we started recording this, just about how you talk to your kids when you have an abuser in the family. I found nothing. I mean, literally nothing. Zero. Zip.
When this all happened, I researched, of course, hours on end. I printed off every handbook I could on prison, wives of prisoners, family members of prisoners, how to handle it. And I got maybe 2 paragraphs that were applicable to us. And I was left thinking, we're going to have to struggle through this and work our way through
Yeah.
the best we can. And that's what we've been doing, really.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to change that. I mean, that's kind of the negative side of it. The positive side is that we've lived through it, and we're willing to talk about it. And it's not like there's a black and white. This is the route that you should go, and because I don't know, like your family is going to be different from my family. Your kids are different than my kids. Your parenting methods are different than my parenting methods. So it's not like this is a one size fits all. Here's what you must do checklist. That's not what this podcast is, but what we want to do is just kind of open up the conversation and talk about things that I've conversation I've had with my kids and how we've handled it, which may or may not be the best method. I don't know.
I think
but
it's
at
trial.
least-
It's trial and error for all of us, but
Sure.
without any trial and error to compare with, we have nothing. So I
Right.
think it's really important, Jimmy,
Yeah.
to open up, and I appreciate so much that you did. It takes a lot of guts to kind of pull yourself open and say, here's my heart, it's bleeding, and here's why.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to work through this with my family and not real sure that every step we're taking along the way is the right or the best step, but we're trying. And that's basically what we're all doing.
Yeah.
We're trying.
So in that blog post, this is kind of the, I guess, the groundwork for this podcast, for this episode. But my, and again, I'll link to it. But my son, it was just him and I, and we were hanging out. He's 8 years old, coolest kid in the world. Like he's just, he's a softie. He's like me. I'm a very emotional person. Like if somebody starts crying in front of me, just watching them cry gets me tearing up because I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm more
You
emotional.
feel
So I feel what
others
people,
feel.
right. I feel what other people are
Exactly.
feeling.
Right.
So my son is a lot that way. Very tender, very kind kid, really creative, and very curious. So he brought up my father, his grandfather, who he's never met, and he knows that my dad's in prison. He knows he'll die in prison. He knows that he's there for abusing kids, sexually abusing kids. He knows all that. So he just said, Dad, I was thinking about this. He said, what was it like to turn in your own dad? And it really caught me off guard. And I said, buddy, it was terrible. It was awful. It was sad. It was lonely. I said, I loved my dad. I had no idea that he was an abuser. And I said, but when I found out, I walked into the police station with your gram and we reported. And I said, because of that, I lost my dad that day. And I said, of course, he's gonna die in prison. And my son says, yeah, but Dad, all of those kids that he was abusing are safe now.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, Dad, I love you. And he said, I love you with all of my heart. And he said, but Dad, if I found out that you were abusing kids, I would turn you into the police. And he said, it would be really sad for me too. But he said, I would have to do it because it would be better to lose my dad than to have those kids be abused and I knew about it. And I'm like, this kid is freaking 8 years old.
Yep. Yep.
And he's a genius. Like, he gets it. He understands it. He truly grasps this concept of being a protector for other people, even if that means losing a family member. Your own parent. That's incredible. So that got me to thinking. Well, it didn't get me to thinking as much as I guess it got people who read the blog to thinking, because I got several messages from people, and they're like, how do you talk to your kid? You know, how did you talk to your kids? How did you start talking to your kids about your dad being in prison, about their grandfather that they never met, because he's still alive. They know he's alive.
Right.
So how do you talk to them about it? So I went back and I looked for blogs. I looked for podcasts, and very strangely, I've never specifically written about that, and you and I have never specifically had one episode on how to talk to your kids when you have an abuser in the family. So here we are.
Right.
So I came up with these 5 things, and you know, these are just kind of general rules that I followed. Again, this is not science. This is not like do this and your kids will grow up and be perfectly adapted. It's going to vary from family to family, but these are the 5 that I did, and they've worked, I think, really well with my children. Number 1, be honest. There's absolutely zero, and I mean 0 reason to hide the fact that a family member is an abuser. Telling your kids especially if the perpetrator is not in prison, is one more layer of protection for your kids. And probably not even one layer. I would say multiple layers of protection.
For sure.
Not telling them of a family member who's an abuser exposes them to being abused if this family member ever shows up to any family events. If there's a family member who is free from prison and is an abuser, my policy immediately is be honest, tell your kids.
Yeah, you have to.
Regardless of their age.
You have to. Yeah.
If they're 2 years old.
Now, of course, you're not going to sit down to a 2-year-old and say, this person molested. You're not going to use words like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Age
Which
appropriate,
you go on
absolutely.
and you explain later on.
But so-and-so is not a safe person to be around.
Right.
And as long as they're here, I'm going to make sure that you're not anywhere around them, and I don't ever want you to be alone with them.
Which would pose the question, not for this podcast, but for future podcasts, if a relative is knowingly a molester, is that person welcome in your home?
Not my home.
And
no.
If there are family reunions and that person is there, do you attend that with your children?
Absolutely not.
Well, I know where you stand.
No, but I understand. I understand other people who.
A lot of people struggle with that.
Who do struggle with it. I'm sympathetic to people who struggle with it.
So
I'm
maybe
sympathetic.
another.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm sympathetic to people who show up. I've had people write me and apologize for showing up to a family event when they knew that a family member was there who was an abuser. I was like, you don't owe me an apology at all. Like I get. You know, that this is genuinely a personal decision, and I'm not here to be judge, juror, and you know, trial to tell you what you should and shouldn't do.
This is where the rubber meets the road, I think, within the home. It really is. Didn't mean to interrupt you, Jimmy.
That's a great point. So, you know, first and foremost, just be honest. We were honest with our kids from the time they were old enough to really start understanding. With our oldest daughter.
Did you wait for them to ask questions, or did you bring it up first? Because I'm sure there are parents wondering, should I bring this up, or do I wait till the kids ask some questions?
To be honest, I don't think it really matters, and strangely, I don't remember. I don't remember if I think that we brought it up first, but I don't remember because it wasn't that big of a deal. We didn't make it awkward. This is only going to be as awkward as you make it. Look,
I know in one of your brother's homes, and I won't mention who, he has pictures on a big screen on his TV. And on that reel loop of pictures that loop around, there are pictures of your dad in there. Obviously, he has talked to his daughters
sure.
about his dad, who he loved like you dearly. Pretty much, I mean, his dad was his idol, for sure. So I know that they know who that is because they've said to me before, well, that's Pep, and they have no recollection of ever
Yeah, they've
knowing
never met him.
No. Right. But they know who that is. So, okay.
Yeah, I mean, again, to me that's not as important. That the how is not as important as the actually just doing it. Just have a conversation. So if it naturally comes up and they're like, oh, by the way, I noticed that we've been going to Graham's. And in fact, I think I do remember one of my kids, and I don't remember which one, at a really young age said, do I have another grandfather?
Yeah.
You never talk about him. And I think it was my 8-year-old who I wrote about in the blog.
Yeah.
So I think that's how it came up with him. I think with the other two, we brought it up. Excuse me. But, to me, that's not as important, whether it just comes up out of their curiosity or whether you mention it. It doesn't really matter. But just be honest. We were honest from the very beginning. I have nothing to hide.
No.
So I'm not going to get all weird about it with my kids. I did nothing wrong. I have nothing to hide.
Well, like you said, kids are curious with internet and, all possible ways you can research now. Kids are going to read on their own anyway when they get to a certain age because out of curiosity, they will want to know.
And they find out from the parent.
Right. That's my point. That is my point.
Yeah.
Better to come from your mouth than from a newspaper article or from gossip.
Yeah. So point number 2, tell them as much or as little as you think they need to know. Right. Again, this depends on your child's age. It depends on whether they were victims or not. It depends on what their relationship was with the abuser before the family discovered that they were an abuser. There are so many different factors that I can't give you this cookie cutter method to talk to your kids because I don't know what's going to work for you. But I can give you that tip that you as a parent or a grandparent or foster parent or whatever, tell them as much or as little as you think that they need to know. With my kids, my wife and I, this is not something that came easy. It's not like we're like, oh, well, here's what we're going to disclose to them, and here's what we don't. Because my wife is the polar opposite of me. I tend to talk way too much. You guys know that if you listen to the podcast. I'm a talker. We have the Italian blood.
You do.
We talk over each other. We we cut each other off. We shout. And, when our family gets together, it's nuts, isn't it?
We use our hands.
We use our hands
Yes,
constantly.
we do. Yeah.
So we're very Italian. My wife is the polar opposite, where her family, they just don't talk about a whole lot of things. They don't give a lot of details. And that's not right or wrong.
No,
it's
it
just
just
different.
is. That's all.
So for
It
her and
is,
I,
right.
She didn't want to talk to our kids at all. And I said, okay, that's perfectly fine. Is it okay if I talk to them? And she said, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
And so we had to sit down together as husband and wife. Bless you. As my friends in college used to say, God bless you, nobody else will.
Sorry. I tried to turn my head. I didn't get it done.
She's allergic to me.
Sorry. My allergies are bad right now.
See?
Sorry.
I told you.
Sorry.
It's only when you're next to me.
I realize that.
So, you know what I mean? This was something that we had so many conversations, and we didn't always come to an agreement at the end of the conversation. Sometimes it was a conversation where one of us, usually it was Natalie, she would say, I don't want to talk about this anymore right now. Okay, great, but we will talk about it again, right? Yeah, absolutely.
That's
We
why
need to talk
hard
about this.
conversations are called hard conversations.
Sure.
They're hard.
So, for
There's
us,
nothing easy about it.
it was this really challenging, almost like a negotiation between the two of us, an ongoing negotiation about what I tell them, when I tell them, how much or little I tell them. So that's an important point. Tell them as much or as little as you think they need to know. Only you will know that.
Right.
Number 3, allow your children to ask questions. Children are naturally curious. It's okay for them to ask questions. But answer in a way that's not evasive, but instead it communicates openness. It lets them know that their question was a good question. They shouldn't feel stupid for asking questions. Let them ask questions. And if a question leads to another question, leads to another question, leads to another question, fantastic. Let them ask questions.
Right.
Again, that goes back to number 1, be honest. Some of the questions that they ask you, you are not going to know the answer to. So tell them, I don't know.
Right.
That's being honest.
Right. As I'm listening to this, Jimmy, what you're doing is laying the groundwork for open communication on any topic.
Absolutely.
And that is so important in any family. And as you know, for our past couple podcasts, we've talked about the hidden cameras and the whole idea of invasion of privacy and things like that. Children need to be able to go to their mom and dad and say, hey, this and this and this happened, or this popped up on my phone, or this was said on the bus. Can you let me know what this means? And is this something, should I be seeing this? Or they
That's
need
exactly
to
right.
know that they can go to mom and dad with anything.
Yeah, if that openness isn't there with your kids, if your kids feel like they're going to get in trouble for asking questions, if they feel like they're going to be made to feel stupid for asking a question, do you think that in a million years your kids are going to talk to you about being abused? If that's happening,
Got it. Bingo.
it's not going to happen.
It
So
won't.
this is laying the groundwork not just for communicating about a family member who's an abuser, but it lays the groundwork for if there's any problem in their life, anywhere,
Absolutely.
anytime.
Heart issues. Kids have heart issues.
Yeah.
They go through depression. They feel isolated. They feel lonely. And yes, abuse happens not just in the home, as was our case, but in other places, in the gymnasium, in school, in swim class, wherever. And this is the foundation for saying, hey, Dad, I need to talk to you about something because something bad happened to me. Exactly.
Yeah, they should be able to talk to you about
Right.
anything, ask any question about anything, anywhere, anytime, and not be shut down for that.
Right.
So, allow your kids to ask questions.
Right.
Number 4, be open about your own emotions. Let your kids know how having a family member as an abuser makes you feel, whether that's being alone, lost, sad, angry, depressed, whatever it is. It's better to talk about your emotions than to hide them and pretend that you're unbothered by the abuse.
Yep. I believe in that 1,000%. I think you know how I feel about that, about sharing how we feel. And sometimes we don't feel real good about how we feel. Sometimes we're even ashamed of how we feel, but that's how we felt at that time. And it's okay to say, man, it was hard. It's still hard. The questions that I get asked are different from yours. I get asked things like, what do you do when it's time to eat? Do you have to eat alone? Who talks to you when you go home from work?
I know the answer to that. You actually talk to yourself.
I do. Oh,
See, I know her well because we
do
have this
all the
open.
time.
I ask questions. It's funny because I was like, I'm listening to these questions.
would you
Listen,
stop
I'm
it?
listening to these questions, and I'm like, these sound really familiar. These questions sound really familiar. I wonder
did this
who asked you these.
I just was doing that yesterday, walking into Walmart, talking out loud to myself, and this man just looked at me like, oh boy, there's a fruitcake for sure.
See?
But it's true. There's all kinds of feelings we have. Let your kids know you're human.
Yeah.
You're the
Yeah,
parent,
completely.
yes, but you cry, you get angry, you laugh, you
Yeah.
get afraid. These are all feelings we feel too, which again makes it easier then for your child to come to you and say, "Hey, Dad, I had a bad dream last night.
Yeah.
I dreamed something that really made me scared." And you open up and say, "What was it?"
And I just
Yeah.
thought about this too as we're talking about this. I would say this with a caveat, okay? So be open about your emotions, but don't turn your kid into your therapist.
No. Oh,
Because I've
no.
seen this
Yeah.
happen where parents get they come to their kids and they'll say, "I just need to talk. I'm alone. I don't have anybody to
Yeah.
talk to," and they dump all this stuff on their kid, and their kid's like,
Not right. No. No.
your kids are still kids, and your kids are not therapists. They're not there for you to unload on. They're not there for you to be a confidant. They're there for you to raise and to shape and to mold and to teach them how to do life.
I am so thankful you just said that, because that is a big heavy on my mind as I'm cleaning the old office, which we won't mention what that looks like. We will not mention the word hoarder. We won't say. We will not say anything about that. But there are emails that have been printed off that I saved for journals and whatnot. I was guilty for a lot of times just airing my grief and pain with you kids, looking for some kind of help. I didn't know where to go, didn't know who to share with. It was unfair because you kids were struggling. You just lost your dad. And I was struggling because I didn't know what to do. So I'm kind of airing out my aloneness and lostness with all of you. And it was a nightmare mess. So
Well, I think that brings up another important point. If because some of you parents may be like, "Oh my goodness, like I've done that." Well, it's not like you wrecked your kids, and it's the unforgivable sin. Like we're all human, right? We are all absolutely trying to figure this out. When there's
Right.
trauma in our life, we're trying to figure out. So don't beat yourself up and be like, "Oh my goodness, like I made my kids my therapist, and now I ruined them for the rest of their lives." No.
Jimmy, that's what happened.
Well, that explains a lot with me, right?
No,
So,
it's
so
it's-
just have this awareness, and again, I'm just telling you guys what I do with my kids.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like, again, I'm not
But
telling
we
you
do
this
need
is
to be
what you
aware
need
of
to do.
that, because sometimes even with small children, will especially when there's family separation,
Mm-hmm.
whatnot. Well, your dad was mean to me. He was horrible, and all. Or he abused me. He hit me, or what. Little kids don't need to hear that.
No, they
from a
don't.
parent.
Yeah, they don't
And
need to relive
so,
trauma that,
yeah,
that you experienced
right.
by
So-
telling them about
And
the
I
trauma.
think we need to be aware of that. I wish I had had somebody tap me on the shoulder and say, "Hey, find an adult to talk to," which
Yeah.
I did eventually. I eventually figured it out. But, every now and then it's good to have that little reminder. Let kids be kids.
Yeah,
We need to
absolutely.
realize that.
Yeah.
Good point, Jimmy.
And then number 5, final point, let other family members decide how much or how little and how to communicate with their kids. It's not up to me to direct my siblings to tell them how to tell my nieces and nephews about my dad, our dad, who's in prison. That's not my place. What I do with my children may not be what my nieces and nephews need. Nobody knows their own kids and what they need better than the parents,
Right.
period.
Right.
Some family members may feel that it's their place. Like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe that my sister refuses to tell her kids about my dad being an abuser, and if she's not going to tell them, I'm going to tell them.
Oh,
Well, that's not really your place, and restraint
and
is
same
really
for
difficult.
grandparent, because
Sure.
glad you brought that up
Yeah.
before. I can remember several years back sending a family email out to all of you saying, "Hey guys, I'm starting to get questions about your dad, and I don't know what you've shared with your
Yep.
kids, but that's your deal."
Yep.
As for me, I just have chosen to say, well, he went away and leave it at that, and because for me, I don't feel that was my thing to say. And each of you did choose a little bit of a different path to talk with your
Everybody
children.
did. Yeah, very different.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
even timing, there are still,
Right.
I have siblings that waited years longer to tell
Right.
their kids than I told mine.
Right.
We started telling our kids pretty much around age 2.
And you were
at
more
least a little
directly
bit.
involved also. And your household was more
Yeah.
directly involved because of your advocacy, in which the kids are not, kind
Yeah,
of
they
their,
see
their
it, they
eyes
know
are
what I
open.
do.
They see it all
Sure.
around you. They hear it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I preach. They
Right.
sit and listen to me preach,
Right.
and I've
Right.
talked very openly about it from the pulpit. So,
Right.
yeah, I mean, again, what I do isn't necessarily what's going to work for other people, and vice versa. But I would definitely avoid telling family members how and what they should
yeah.
communicate with their own kids, unless they ask. If they ask, then by all means offer up advice, offer up help, whatever you want to do. But don't offer unsolicited advice for how people should talk to their kids when there's an abuser in the family.
Amen, amen, amen. Yes.
So
Yeah.
those are our quick tips, and I guess our truth bomb is at least talk a little bit to your kids. If you have an abuser in the family, at a bare minimum, talk a little bit. Be honest, be open with them, and then just kind of figure it out along the way.
I think honesty is always the best policy.
Yeah, there's no silver bullet for
Right.
how
No.
to do this.
No, we're learning as we go along.
Sure, and that's
Yeah.
okay. And give yourself room to have
Right.
grace.
Right.
So,
And we solicit your comments. When Jimmy posts this podcast, don't be afraid to comment and let us know how you feel. How
Sure.
have you dealt with a similar situation? What has worked with you? What's worked within your family? What are you doing now within your family? Give us some feedback. We all like to learn and share together.
yeah,
We're
Absolutely.
not pros by any means on this topic.
yeah. So, thank you guys for tuning in to this episode, and we will catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. A special thank you to our patrons who make this podcast possible. Please help us get the word out by searching for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. Please consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron and check out the rewards our patrons receive.